The legal business is in great change right now. There is increasing competition together with globalization. As clients go global, law firms are trying to go with their clients and serve those clients. And what they're trying to do is to find the right talent to help them serve those clients in the best possible way. Fundamental role of communications is to help law firms attract and retain clients and attract, retain, and engage talent that's going to serve those clients. And that's where communications comes into play. Very important for communications to internally create a cohesive team, especially as the law firm gets very large and very scattered. It's important for the people in the firm at all levels, whether it's a lawyer or professional support staff, to understand what the firm's strategy is and its direction, then to be able to organize their work around in support of that direction. At the same time, it's very important for that firm in an environment of increasing competition to really stand out and be different. And that's where the positioning role of communications comes into play. I can't speak about other professional services businesses. I've only worked in the communication side as well as the legal side. But I can speak about the lawyers. They're a fascinating group of individuals to work with. They are intellectually powerful, deeply thoughtful, very disciplined, very organized individuals. They hold themselves to a very high work standard, high work ethic. And a 14, 16, 18-hour day is not unusual in a law firm, and therefore it's not unusual for the people who support lawyers. And you add in the global layer, where you're working in the time differences and the zones. You can be making phone calls at 6 a.m. You could have another phone call at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. some nights, and occasionally later. So it's a very dynamic environment that's being influenced strongly by changes in the macroeconomic picture, globalization, for example. Law firms are trying to decide whether they should be as global as many of their clients are. And if they do decide to become global, how should they go about doing that? Should they focus on certain practice areas? Or should they broaden their offering to a much bigger number of practices that meet the broad needs of a corporation that they serve? So that's very exciting. At the same time, cost pressures are coming into play with law firms. So clients are asking their law firms to do better and better work, faster, better, cheaper. And so there's pressure to drive costs down. And that goes right against a trend to drive inflation, to inflate salaries for lawyers. There's a war for talent in the legal business. And the firms that have the best talent tend to win the most business. And so they're prepared to pay for that talent. And that's pushing prices for the best talent up. And at the same time, clients are trying to push that price down. And so there's some very interesting trends going on. And that really influences the role communications can play, both externally presenting the firm, but also internally keeping people working in a cohesive way. So for example, in the firm I was working with, what we focused on initially was raising external profile, primarily through the media. Our goal was to make sure that people who were going to purchase legal services or be instrumental in the purchase of those services had a clear, up-to-date understanding of what that firm really stood for, what made it special, what made it effective. So we were really very often trying to tell the story about the thought leadership that that firm had in various practice areas. We also spoke about the strength of the business of that firm, and that firm's ability to be highly profitable, to grow its top line, and to manage its people in an engaging, effective way. In addition to what we were doing on the external side, we were really focusing on internal communications increasingly. It was a large firm, 70 offices, 40 countries, and it was very important for the 10,000 people in the firm at all levels to really understand where the firm was headed and their role in the firm. So communications, for example, would help people understand progress against the strategy. It would help them understand major client wins. We would help them understand new lawyers who were brought into the firm who would take the firm to a higher level. One of the things that we did that was quite interesting, after great amounts of debate, we decided to create a chairman's blog. We did that just in the end of 2010. I can tell you that law firms aren't necessarily the earliest adopters of new technologies. But after a great amount of debate about the ability to keep that information secure and to prevent it from going outside to the legal blogs, we agreed we would go ahead. We created the chairman's blog, and it very, very quickly caught on with a high number of users, people at all levels around the firm, to the point that when the chairman was traveling, people would say, "Hey, I read your post. I really like that, and here are 3 other suggestions for posts we would like you to do." So it became a primary vehicle for the chairman to communicate across the firm at all levels up and down, in all markets around the world, all practices, and it became a real go-to resource for important news inside the firm. But that only came after a great deal of debate. As you might appreciate, lawyers are quite risk averse. They can think of every single thing that might go wrong in any situation or scenario. So after a great deal of debate, we were able to reassure firm management that we're going to be able to secure the information there, and that anything we might say on the blog would not really put the firm at risk from a strategic advantage or from any other risk. And we were able to manage that quite effectively, and it became quite a useful tool. Great. A few firms have begun getting their feet wet by using social media internally, like the chairman's blog I mentioned. Others have set up Facebook pages. Most firms now have LinkedIn pages. And the firms are just starting to think about and starting to use external blogs to communicate their thought leadership in certain practice areas. But you have to be very careful because of bar regulations or Department of Justice regulations in many countries. You cannot provide legal advice through that means without labeling as legal advice, or you become liable for certain penalties. So there's a very careful line that firms are still figuring out how to walk and to try to stay in conformance with the law, but also to try to utilize the tool to reach others. In the case of Twitter, for example, many of the firms are using it as essentially a broadcast tool. They'll announce something in firm news, they'll announce a new hire, for example, they'll announce their annual results, or they might use a Twitter feed to announce major victories that the firm has had on behalf of a client. But they're really not engaging at this point with their stakeholders externally through the means because of the sensitivities and also because of the practical aspects. To engage with people on a virtually real-time basis, it takes manpower that's empowered to actually communicate with those stakeholders very quickly, very easily. And being risk-averse, some law firms are not quite there yet, but I really think we'll see them get there in a not too distant future. One of the other roles for communication in a law firm environment is to manage issues and crises which may arise. And law firms are businesses too. Although lawyers often think of themselves as being in a profession, a craft, really law firms are a business as well. And they're a business of people, and where there are people, there inevitably are some issues and problems. A partner that perhaps doesn't do the right thing, an office that doesn't necessarily treat a client in the right way, a practice that falls out of step with what's going on in the market. And occasionally there are issues that you need to provide crisis counseling, crisis communications, so that people internally and externally understand very clearly what the firm's position is, but of course doing so in a way that does not increase the liability of the firm if that's an unsettled matter. Law firms, no surprise, are very often targets for lawsuits, malpractice suits and other things that are very potentially risky to their reputation. It's interesting that law firms are a quite fragile organism. Partners have to have trust and confidence in one another, and the marketplace has to have trust and confidence in the law firms and the people in those firms. And just 2 or 3 events, 2 or 3 episodes or incidents, real or alleged, can very often put a law firm on a steep downward slide. And when law firms, like many partnerships, start to slide, that slide can go very quickly. It happens when talent start to depart from more safe havens to other firms, where they go corporate. And if and when a law firm starts to lose significant talent, there's a very, very serious risk that the law firm itself could dissolve. In the last few years, we've seen law firms that have been in business for 100 or more years dissolve within the matter of months. And it's quite sad, to be honest with you. And the livelihoods, the work, and the effort of people over decades to make that law firm strong. And some of these law firms were truly great law firms. But when those law firms dissolved, lives were changed, impacted, and not always for the better. So communications can help to create the trust and the environment of a positive growth that's necessary for the cohesion of a partnership and for the endurance of a partnership. One of the great things about working in a law firm is just to see the quality of debate and discussion. Even when partners might be in the greatest opposition on a particular topic or issue, at least in my experience, I always saw them approach that issue, no matter how emotional they might have felt inside, with the most rational, calm, and thoughtful argument. And so counseling as a communicator or any other business executive within a law firm environment has to very often take on the same demeanor. You can't be pounding on the desk, raising your voice, and making an emotional plea. You have to think as a lawyer would, very often, in a very rational, thoughtful, disciplined way to try to gain an understanding, a common ground, and the ability to then move forward with an agreed approach. Lawyers, too, again, are risk averse, so very often you have to anticipate in putting forth an idea or a recommendation all of the possible objections that might come up in the course of any conversation. And then you need to think of a few more, because it's very likely you'll get some things, you'll hear some things that you had never even imagined would come up. And you need to methodically and rationally deal with those so that you can move forward with any idea or new plan. So working in a law firm in any support role, including a communications role, requires patience, persistence, and fortitude. Law firms are a great place to work for people who like to work at the center of business, because law firms are really at the center of business, together with financial services businesses, in helping fuel and help organizations move forward. And the global law firms just magnify that interest level for people like me. It's a chance to work across borders, across disciplines, with a bunch of very, very smart people who will challenge you to be your absolute best every day. You can't have a bad day in a law firm. You have to be on your game every minute. So for those of us who like discipline or maybe need a little more, a law firm is a great place to work. It's also a great place to work because the business is changing so quickly. Because you're at the center of the business, you're seeing globalization really impact the way law firm clients go forward. And take, for example, a merger. In a cross-border merger, there are a range of issues that come up and come into play. There can be employment issues, there can be tax issues, there can be antitrust issues, in addition to the usual financial issues that arise. And working in a law firm, you're really at the center of that. So it's very stimulating, very exciting. Law firms also are very committed to serving their constituents, particularly through pro bono legal service, and also increasingly through diversity and sustainability initiatives that for those who are really socially minded, it's a great place to make a difference. It's extraordinary what some law firms are doing these days to make the world a better place. I know that, for example, some are involved in helping to write new constitutions for countries that have just come out of conflicts. They're helping to create rule of law in emerging democracies. They're helping to write the laws and the regulations that will allow those countries to move beyond where they've been, and very often that's in great conflict. And to be a part of an organization that's doing those kinds of things is very deeply, deeply rewarding. In addition to the opportunities of working in a law firm, there are some challenges. The law firms are not for everyone. First of all, you have to understand that a law firm is fundamentally a partnership. of whatever number of individuals who view themselves as equals. There's less hierarchy in a partnership, and therefore it's not always crystal clear who's in charge, who's the boss. I know that in some law firms they say that you have, let's say the law firm has 100 partners, you have 100 bosses. And some law firms even approach their communications in that manner that allows any partner to access the communications function. Others structure it a little more from the top down. But it's a partnership, and the partnership fundamentally exists to keep the partnership together. And anything that really threatens that will either not be accepted or rejected entirely. So it's a tough place to work in the sense of these strong-minded, talented, disciplined individuals. Also, it's interesting that lawyers are fundamentally writers. And so many of us in communications are writers at heart as well. And lawyers consider themselves to be experts on language, grammar, structure, argument. And communicators feel that way too. Lawyers in particular love the written word. One lawyer told me once that they didn't like the use of video because video excluded certain things, whereas a piece of paper you could easily see and understand what was on the paper, figure out what was missing, and go back and circle back and eliminate the risk. Whereas in video, lawyers said that they felt like they were being manipulated in some ways. They knew that the piece was edited, and they knew it was a piece of propaganda, and they didn't inherently trust it. So whether it's writing a speech for a lawyer or creating a video or doing whatever else you're doing, the process of communication just takes on an extra dimension of richness and complexity that creates challenge, but sometimes actually yields very, very good outcomes and products. The role of communications in a law firm environment is really twofold. It's to help that firm attract and retain key clients, and to help that firm attract, retain, and engage the talent that's critical in serving those clients.